Take command. That's Logan. I am Craig. And everything always, Logan, in football, it starts with the run game. It starts in the trenches. It starts up front, or perhaps how the second level gets down into the trenches. What have you noticed when you're watching the Giants on film? Because this is a team that has really good personnel in the front, but the rushing numbers would suggest that they're actually not very good in that department.
Yeah, and it's a little bit confounding. Like when you watch them, it's because they have Dexter Lawrence, who is maybe the second best defensive player in the NFL. They've got, Brian Burns, who I've always been a little bit lukewarm on, but seems to be coming on as a pass rusher. They've got Bobby Okereke. I'm not sure exactly.
Okereke, I believe, is the correct.
And they've got Micah McFadden, the other middle linebacker. And those guys are good. They're good football players. Like when you watch Okereke, like he is big, he's physical, he's fast, he's instinctive. And so you're like, man, with this personnel, they should be pretty good at stopping the run. The problem is, like when you watch them against Pittsburgh, when you watch them against Philly, I think the front is fine, but like, in any NFL structure, like the safeties have to come in and fit the runs, right? They kind of play, Shane Bowen kind of plays, he plays all sorts of different coverages, cover 6, cover 4, a little bit of cover 3, a little bit of man, right? But in that quarters coverage and that cover 6 coverage, those safeties have to fit those runs from depth. And let's say if it's quarters and the corners have to fit, right? The problem is like they don't seem to be fitting runs well. They're fine individually. Like you'll see Dexter Lawrence like throw the center down and make a tackle, and it's like, oh my gosh, that's awesome. Or Azeez Ojulari kind of beat the tight end and make a tackle for loss, like whatever. But on a down-to-down basis, like there's a play against Pittsburgh where Brian Burns is supposed to set the edge and he kind of loops in because he's like trying to pursue to make the tackle. And the running back's like, there's no force player to the offensive left. I'm just going to run for 30 yards because there's nobody here. And that happens way too much, versus Philly. They were pretty kind of, obviously Pittsburgh's more like a little bit more perimeter. Like the stat that gets floated around there is they're the worst team in the NFL at defending perimeter runs. That's not exactly true because, for example, like when you block a duo run and you hit the cutback, that's an inside run, but you're hitting the cutback to the place where the player isn't anymore, right? And so you see a lot of that type of stuff, guys just getting out of position. Philly ran a lot of kind of Wanda where people aren't fitting the run correctly or guys are getting gapped out. I can't tell how many times I've seen where the corner is the force player or the defensive end's the force player and the running back just runs around the force player and it's like a 40-yard gain. I really don't understand why that happens to them all the time. And I don't know if it's a technique thing or if it's a schematic thing, but it comes up. I've watched 3 games. Every game it pops up. So I do think finding ways to, again, attack that weakness is going to be super important. And obviously in the first matchup, Cliff did a great job of that. And he did it a little bit different than Philly. He did it a little different than Pittsburgh would do it. This is the game where they threw all those perimeter screens and then they got the Giants to widen out and kind of cover numbers. They had, if there's 3 receivers to the right, they'd have 4 defenders and they had light boxes and you're able to get these huge gashes with B-Rob and Austin Eckler. So I think that's probably something I would expect to see a similar version of again. But I think Shane Bowen's a smart guy. I think he's going to find a way to kind of say, hey, how do we take away these quick screens and how do we kind of force them to run the ball in a more conventional way? And that being said, I think Cliff has done a good job of saying Jayden's playing better. We don't need to throw as many screens. We can run a more conventional, traditional offense. So that's, again, like we talked about at the top, like, obviously we need to run the football. How do we run the football? From the first matchup in week 2, like we've changed in terms of how we run the football. And how does that now fit into Shane Bowen? And how does Shane Bowen now fit off of what he anticipates us doing?
Time for the Craig has stats portion of the podcast. I got to shout out our guy Sam Fortier who looked this up for me. But the Commanders' rush success rate. So success rate is basically on first down, do you get half the yardage you need on first and second down, or do you get third down? Obviously, to be successful, you need all of the yardage. So if you're at first and 10, do you get 5+ yards? If you're second 8, do you get 4+ yards? That's the thresholds for success rate. Commanders' rush success rate is 42.5%, which is 7th in the NFL overall. But what I wanted to do was test my theory. Logan, we talked about this on the pod on Tuesday of Brian Robinson's efficacy. And this doesn't even paint the whole picture of B-Rob because I would love to know like their play action success rate, for instance, when he is on the field versus not, when he's the guy getting the ball fake versus not. but they're 42.5% in general. The number one team in the league is Detroit at 46.9. If you take just B-Rob's runs, 48.4.
Oh, wow.
So they would be first in the league if you just take the Brian Robinson runs. Their Commanders' rush success rate without Robinson on the field, 33.7, would be 26th.
Wow.
So B-Rob is absolutely killing it. And the offense as a whole is way more effective with him. And I do like when I hear you talk about like, oh, the contained players are not doing their job. If you're Shane Bowen, I don't know what you do about that. Like there's no scheme that you can pick that's like, oh, okay, this is how we fix the fact that we can't contain anybody. This run fit doesn't have a contained player. And so it comes down to Cliff kind of forcing the issue on some of that stuff. And I think this is where the variety in the Commanders' run game really comes to play, because they can, if they find a weakness, they will spam it. That is modern NFL football. If you can't defend duo, we'll just run duo. If you can't defend the GT stuff on the perimeter, we'll do that. And the fact that the Commanders can do all of that, and to your point, they also are not as reliant on some of the screen stuff, although that stuff still has been pretty good for them. I think there's a game. I actually was talking about this with Sam. There's a game coming where they go back to that in a heavy way because they think they can get a team. And I wonder if maybe the Giants are that team. But they haven't used the screen game, wide receiver or running back, as much in recent weeks. And I do wonder, how they stress the Giants in that way, considering that was such a big part of their game plan the first time around.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, it's like, this is more technical, like kind of nerdy football stuff. If you're the Giants, is, for example, like we're talking about how they're not running perimeter runs. They're running like downhill runs that the back reads out. And obviously B-Rob, like you talked about, has been playing great. I think B-Rob's excellent at that just in general. So that's something I think to keep an eye on for sure. Also, like technically, I don't know if they've got guys that understand how to play the run from an edge position, right? So for example, one of the runs versus Philly, they're running kind of this kind of like mid-zone, right, to the offensive left. Philly is with Saquon Barkley. And Azeez Ojulari is in what I would characterize as a really good position on the tackle. He's got two hands on the tackle's chest. He's totally boxed the run. And when you box the run, your shoulders are square to the line of scrimmage, but you're like up the field a little bit. And Saquon Barkley just literally like takes it, bounces around the guy, and he doesn't react quick enough to get there. So I don't know if that's like a personnel thing for them. Also, I think the secondary is not fitting it well. I think I said that already. But I think I'm really curious to see what Cliff does. To me, I think they're going to fall in kind of in between Philly and Pittsburgh. And what I mean by that is Philly kind of was in this mid-zone kind of gap scheme era. And then I think the Pittsburgh Steelers were kind of predominantly gap scheme because that's kind of what they want to be, downhill with Najee
Harris.
Harris, yeah. And so I think Cliff can, like you said, has done a really good job of being like, oh, hey, we can attack the perimeter with our our center guard pull stuff, or we can do counter, we can do duo, we can do wandas. And I think those runs, while not traditional perimeter runs, could potentially be very effective against the Giants because of how they can potentially bounce to the perimeter. And we just talked about how their defensive end personnel, their secondary personnel, which are fitting kind of these runs, have not done a great job of that because they're kind of getting out of position versus these runs. So I can't wait to see how that looks, and I can't wait to see B-Rob run the football a ton. Also, I think, like you alluded to there, like what's the wrinkle? Like I think they do a good job each week of kind of adding a little bit of wrinkle. Maybe this is a different run. This is a different formation. Week 1 or week 2, whenever that game was, it was, we're going to throw a ton of screens. We're going to get you to widen out. We're going to make soft boxes and we're going to hit it. They might do the same thing, like, because it worked. And that's, again, where this chess match of this killed you guys week 1. What's your solution to that? Because the other crazy thing about defense is I can't allocate all the resources I want to stop the screen without making myself susceptible to the run. So What is his solution? Do they blitz us a little bit more? Do they play different coverages than we expect? So I think that's something, again, that's going to be really compelling is after getting gashed on the ground, after getting gashed with all these screens, you can't just come into the game plan and say we're going to do the same thing, even though our offense, the Commanders' offense, has evolved slightly since then.
Yeah, one of the things that they have figured out, I think, too, in the screen game, they being Cliff and the staff, is who should be catching those things, too. Like week 2 was the week that they tried to get Terry the ball a bunch in that regard, and it didn't go anywhere. And they've figured out since how to get the ball to Terry, the routes that work for him, but also that Diami, who came into the league as like the deep ball guy, is maybe the best screen runner on the team.
Yeah.
And so like they're hitting Diami and OZ with those a lot more. And I think that's something that's to watch as well. It's like if they like the looks, but they need guys in different spots to execute it at the level, they have that figured out now more than they did earlier in the season. So that's something to watch for as well. In terms of passing the ball otherwise, that is where going against this Giants defense becomes challenging. Their back end has some issues, but up front, their pass rush is nasty, man. And they got after Jayden the first game. They got 5 sacks, and that's kind of been who they are. They are a team that leads the NFL in sacks by a wide margin, by the way. They got 35. The next highest team is the Broncos with 30. So what is it that makes their pass rush so effective, and how does Washington prevent Jayden from getting hit a whole bunch like he did in week 2?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is that, Dexter Lawrence is a beast, and his ability to create pressures from the nose is very special. Like in the Pittsburgh game, I think that's a great example. His ability to, and I think that was the backup center, but he just made that guy look like he doesn't belong on an NFL field. And I know that's probably not true. I know that guy's probably a fine football player, but that's just a tough draw. And so his ability to kind of turn shoulders, his ability for such a big man to kind of get vertical into that gap off the shoulder of the center, and he's so big that the guard has a hard time closing it down. He had probably 3 pressures that didn't turn into sacks that he didn't get the credit for the sack, but was a sack for the defense because it's an immediate flush for the quarterback. And so first and foremost, how do you handle him? And again, his pressure to sack ratio is very, very high. He's converting pressures into sacks at a very high rate, probably because he's so close to the quarterback. And then you look at Brian Burns, a guy who I think is maybe slightly overrated, but is playing really good football as a pass rusher. And when you see him rush the edge, he gets vertical and can really attack that perimeter. Again, think about it. Dexter Lawrence is powering right up the middle. The quarterback steps back. Brian Burns is a demon off the edge of the defense, right? They've also started using him in different ways in terms of, hey, we're not just going to have you heat the edge because you are so athletic, because you are so bendy. We're going to run some line stunts and you're going to be the looper. And he does a really nice job with that. And I think that's a really good utilization package for him to just maximize his skill set. And then you couple that with a guy like Azeez Ojulari, who is kind of a designated pass rush specialist, but because Kayvon Thibodeau is on IR, he's in more. And Kayvon Thibodeau, again, high draft pick, big name notoriety. Rushing the passer, they're better with Azeez Ojulari on the field. He has 6 sacks. I think he's only played in 4 games. He has been very prolific. He's on a little bit of a heater. So, and again, very similar to Brian Burns in terms of how he wins. We're attacking high, and I think it all stems with Dexter Lawrence being able to compress the pocket. And you kind of say, how does that fit with the Commanders? Cliff's done a great job of understanding how to chip help, how to send slides, how to use different protections to maximize guys. The problem with a good nose is that you can't really give as much help as you want. You can send slides, right? But Dexter Lawrence has shown an ability to do it. And this is Fred Smoot's favorite stat about Tyler Biadasz, but he has not given up a sack to Dexter Lawrence. I don't know what the time duration is, if it's the last 3 years, but
twice a year, because he was in division in Dallas too. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah. So it's, I don't know the exact time duration, but that is going to be a really compelling matchup because he really is the engine that drives that defense in terms of pass rush. He drives them from a run defense standpoint. I think he's a little overhyped. I'm going to put this in air quotes because he's one of the best players in football. It's hard to be overhyped at anything. I don't think he's as good at stopping the run as his frame would give him credit for, but he definitely makes up for that because he's such a disruptive person when it comes to the pass. So that to me is going to be a really interesting dynamic to kind of keep an eye on with that group.
To be clear, anybody in New York who might want to clip that out and say Logan Paulson says Dexter Lawrence is overhyped, he called him the second best defensive player in football 10 minutes ago.
Yeah, and I just said it right before that. It's a modifier. Everyone thinks he's 350, he's going to stop the run away. He does it fine, but it's not like you're watching Ted Washington out there, right? You can move him off the spot sometimes. And again, he makes plays in the run game. It's just his superpower, kind of surprisingly, is he can rush the passer really, really well.
Yeah. Ted Washington sounds like a fake founding father.
Doesn't it? Yeah. Do you remember him, though, for the Bears? Dude, huge man. I think he was 6'6", 6'5", but I think he weighed 375. They used to call him Mount Washington.
Washington. 56 years old now. Played back in the day. Bills and Bears. He weighed 375. He sure did. He was 6'5", 375.
Big man.
I did not remember Ted Washington.
You don't get a nickname like Mount Washington unless you're absolutely enormous.
No, but it does sound like he signed the Declaration of Independence with Benjamin Franklin. I'm just saying. The back end of that Giants defense, real quick, they've obviously had some issues. They benched Deonte Banks last week. They've come out and said like he's back in this week. That was a temporary thing. Why have they struggled so much? And is this something that Washington, like if you're Washington, is this hey, we need to take advantage of it because they're bad in zone and miscommunicate things, or there's a ton of air? Are they bad in man to man? Like what's the back end stuff, and how does Washington take advantage of it?
I don't know. I really don't know, because like when I watch them, I'm like, they're actually playing pretty good. You know what I mean? Like to my eye, again, are they perfect? No, like they're not like a top 10 secondary or anything like that. But they've got Banks matching the number one receiver usually, and that's a tough draw. Like obviously against AJ Brown, I think he did some good stuff, but AJ Brown's top 5 receiver in football. He's going to make you look like a fool sometimes. Drew Phillips, the guy from their slot player, Andrew Phillips, is playing exceptional football as a run stopper and in man-to-man coverage. Does he get beat? Absolutely. He got beat by Kayvon Austin on the Monday night game, but like that happens. Like, you know what I mean? Like on a down-to-down consistent basis, he's doing a good job. And then Tyler Nubin, the rookie from Minnesota, I think is playing fine. Like he's not like a game record by any stretch of the imagination, but they're playing fine. And I think that's something that's a little confusing to me, why there's so much negative conversation around them in the back end, is because I think they're fine. And usually that's enough to win football games. I think the one thing, and we'll talk about this when we get to the offense probably, is their offense is a little bit sluggish, and it puts a lot of pressure on the defense to be really, really good. And I think I will say this, I think the Giants are a good unit. I don't think they're a great unit. And so they need to have that kind of symbiotic relationship with the offense, where the offense is supporting them with game flow and time of possession and things like that. And they're just not getting it. So I think you are seeing them, the temperatures turned up a little bit on the defense, and as a result, some pipes are starting to burst. And I think that's what this feels like to me. And obviously the Banks thing is interesting to me, because it feels like, again, when you're watching down to down, nothing pops out from like a negative play standpoint. It feels like there's some effort, kind of coaching off the field type relationship stuff that's going on there, that it doesn't strike me as a play issue necessarily. An effort issue maybe, but not like I'm bad in coverage, in the same way that like I can't think of a good example, but like, where someone is obviously playing poorly and needs to be benched. Like Anthony Richardson. Like Anthony Richardson's playing bad football. He needs to sit down. Joe Flacco takes over. Like that one's very clear. I'm not really sure why, because to me he's playing okay, and like okay secondary play is fine in the NFL.
Yeah, Emmanuel's had stretches like that in his first couple of years, where it's just like, this is not the leverage we asked you to play. Like,
yes,
we need to sit you down and do this. And so maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's not that, it's the effort side of it, where it's just like, man, like we need you every single snap. Like if you're gonna shadow a number one guy, like you have to be locked in at all times, and perhaps he's not ready for that responsibility. That is kind of the thing though with the game flow. It's like it comes down to opportunities. And we talk about this, again, let's talk about a guy that we praise way more than people wish we did, like Benjamin St-Juste, right? Like BSJ is a good corner down in and down out, but eventually you'll probably get him because he's not, Sauce Gardner. Right. And if the more opportunities you have with all them snaps, because your offense isn't doing what it needs to, the better chance that you're going to get to the one that pops. And it sounds like maybe that's what's happening a little bit with this Giants defense.